Hi everyone, welcome back to Unconventionally Systemic. Today we thought about we hope to talk about colorism. And Lola was asking, what exactly are we going to talk about? And I said everything and anything pertaining to whatever comes up for us, and any intersects that may also come up in terms of the work we do in the therapy, but also in terms of our own experiences. Now, for me, this is a big topic. It's a big topic that crosses over so many aspects of my life, to the point where in the therapy room with colleagues, it's started to come up as in quite apparent, like voiced, as in naming, as in, because we've gotten to that level of comfortability, I think. And I think that's really powerful when you can have those conversations, to not necessarily to challenge, but to share thinking around, oh, is this what this is this what's going on, but also in terms of questioning ourselves, in terms of what things can we say or can we not say in the therapy space when it comes to um aspects of kind of what someone's tone of skin is, and what comes with that, what doesn't come with that. When you talk about it, what do you kind of, what do you give power to, and what do you subjugate, what is going on there? So I suppose there's a lot of those thoughts in my head as we're kind of broaching the topic, but I also want to give other people an opportunity to think, to kind of free flow in, when we're saying colorism, what are we thinking in our minds in terms of our perspectives?
What I'm thinking about, I don't know if this isn't going to answer your question, Mario. I'm so sorry. That's what I was really thinking of. What does it mean? When I'm thinking about colorism, I suppose I'm thinking about the, and I suppose it's hard because I think I'm always thinking about it from a benefit and deficit kind of position, and I'm thinking about the the privileges that are afforded to people that are lighter skinned, um, compared to people who are darker skinned. And I think I'm very, I speak from this position because I am a lighter skinned black woman, and I often, and actually it's something that happens quite a lot, especially at work. So I work in a hospital part time, and one of the things that I'm constantly think one of the things that I interact with quite a lot is the idea that people think that I'm mixed race, and it's a presumption people make all the time that I'm mixed race. And I suppose it's it's they aren't wrong, but I think it's the presumption that the mix that I come from is that one of my parents is black and one of my parents is white, and actually that's not the mix at all. So I often find myself countering it, saying, "No, I'm not mixed race." Like, and I often say to people, "I'm not mixed race in the way that you think I am." And I suppose, yeah. So my my heritage is, so I have South American, so what we call kind of Amerindian. So that's native or first indigenous American Indian, so Venezuelan actually, so South American, and then uh, Indian, Black African. Those are the kind of mixes that make up my heritage. Um, but it also means that there are some presumptions that people make when they see me and they see my lighter skin, and I'm very aware of the affordances that gives me in certain spaces, in terms of how people interact with me. And I'm speaking in quite coded language because I know the way people talk about me, or the way that people talk to me, is very different from my friends who are darker skinned, and the way that my darker skinned friend may get followed around shops more, or may have negative assumptions made about them, whereas I don't necessarily. um, that's Yeah, so that's when I think of colorism, those are some of the nuances, and knowing that I also don't want to dominate the time being, lighter skinned as well. So I will open up the floor to others.
I wanted to say it's interesting. That's really interesting to know, Megan. I didn't know some of those things. And I've probably fallen into the trap of kind of when people say they're mixed or they seem mixed, like in terms of what that mix is. Like I think there is almost like an automatic, yeah, and I've been guilty of it, an automatic assumption of what that mix is. You like people would literally think, oh, like one parent was white, the other parent was like dark skinned. Do you know what I mean? They'll just automatically think that. And it's like you're saying to us, a lot of the time that's not the case. And then Lola was asking about the hair, like hair texture. Like you can't see my hair because I wrap my hair. So and that adds also another connotation to what type of mix it is or what type of shade of your skin it's going to be. And I've been pulled up on these things when I've made comments on these things, when I've been curious about these things in figuring, not figuring out, but trying to understand someone's um heritages in terms of kind of like racially or kind of what parts what the you know whatever it is, whatever you want to call it, um because of what I might take it as, or what I might privilege, or what I might like, or what might be my preference, or people being perceived in a particular way or judged in a particular way. Because sometimes when it comes to white people, we are very quick to say that, oh, is that a microaggression? Is that is that we do it with each other as well, of different complexions, of different hair types. We do it with each other. And I think sometimes we don't call each other out on some of these things. And I was called out by and I like Lola and Megan are just cracking up because I made a certain body movement. You know, when a black woman is giving some type of attitude and they're talking with their body, that just happened, guys. So yeah, sorry you missed it. But yeah, so I was called out, and it was so interesting and fascinating because this was in a systemic space, and this was around compliments, and this was about kind of what things was, how we assimilate to clients or don't assimilate, or even why the clients, the people why the people we work with might even choose us, why they want to work with us, like why they want to work with someone with a dark complexion or with mix or someone who's presenting in a certain way, and why others don't. These are really important things that I think we really need to bring out in this episode.
Do you know what? I guess when everyone was talking, I guess I was just thinking actually, I guess at what point did that become conscious of colorism? But I guess I was thinking about the differences for me because when growing up in Nigeria back home when I was a child and also moving to the UK, and actually you're right, Mama, in saying that we do it amongst each other. I remember that the fairer skinned people get better treatment even back home, and because of that, people would actually bleach their skin. I don't want to again go in because that could be a whole nother topic in terms of bleaching. And actually I think I always used to think that it was only like black people that did it. I remember I had a friend in 6 months, she was like, actually, even in India they do that as well. And I was really shocked. Like I was just like, there's no way. Again, it was that assumption I made that if I saw someone from that heritage, that must be, I would never even think they were a different complexion before. Whereas I guess as a black person or as someone of African descent, when I see an African person, I can usually tell because of certain with their knuckles or certain pigments in certain parts of their body. And I guess for me, I don't know, I guess it used to frustrate me when I was young because I was like, why wouldn't you just love the skin that you're in? Um but I know that it's also deeper than that, and I can imagine because for a lot of people, it changes their life. Like I mean, like in terms of the treatment, work wise, even being desired when it comes to sexual relations, and I guess I don't know actually, and I'm not quite even sure what I'm trying to say, and I guess I was kind of thinking about where this started from. I guess I think that's what I'm trying in terms of where did this start from? How did this become normalized in terms of, preferring a shade of skin tone over another? Does that make sense? And because that's something that I was thinking. Where did this start from? How did we get to this? How did it get to this point? What was life like before? Or was life always like this? I guess I was having this sort of maybe philosophical thoughts in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, Lola, I'm quite surprised you said you was because you made a reference to hearing about a friend say that it's common, and it is. I think I can only speak for like the Bangladeshi culture, but from my understanding, like colorism is a really, really big thing in South Asia, and I think also East Asia as well. And yeah, I think even like growing up, there was it wasn't just colorism. It wasn't just the shade of your skin, and it wasn't just, oh, the lighter you are, the fairer you are, the better. But it was so much more than that. It was essentially like glamorizing very Eurocentric features. So like if you have the sharp notes, if you have the thin physique, is it physique, like just, and it was very much guided by Eurocentric ideas of beauty. And for me, that's because I guess when I think about colorism, it wasn't just about oh, you're being fairer or being lighter skin. It was also about, do you have, for me and for Bengalis anyway, it was like, oh, browner hair or black hair. So like a lot of like Bangladeshis, we tend to have quite black hair, but it's like, oh, if you have like lighter brown, not lighter brown hair, but like have lighter hair or like have light brown eyes. It was like more than just skin. But yeah, and I don't know how much I know, Lola, you said something about where does this come from, and I honestly, there could be so many things, but I think there is that element of history where I guess I'd be quite curious to know what it was like before, or where did these things kind of develop. And it's scary because it's still such a big issue within like my culture anyway. It's still such a big issue, and I just feel like sometimes it seems like ever since, I kind of grew up in London, but I've still seen it and I've witnessed it, and it's almost like it's become more subtle, but it still happens. I don't know how to explain it, but it's more like there would be comments, or there would be, for example, like going on holiday and then coming back with a tan, for example, or I guess in like Bengali families, we tend to be quite mixed in terms of like the shades that we range in, and it can be quite drastic. And sometimes there's that thing of comparing that happens a lot as well, comparing between your siblings who might be fairer or darker, and it happens now, but I feel like it's when I talk about to my mum, like of growing up, what it was like for her, I feel like it's changed, it's evolved, but not in a good way. I feel like it's just become different in the way it manifests itself, and I feel like that's similar to kind of how racism has become as well. It's like, oh yeah, we're not going to explicitly say it, but then there's these things like microaggression and like institutional racism, and I feel like we're trying to make progress, but I feel like we're not. We're just getting better at hiding it, and that's how it's been like for me anyway, or that's how I feel regarding this matter anyway. I don't know how right that is, but
I think you raised really, really good points about the kind of colonial aspects or inheritance that we all have got about what is the ideal and what is kind of ideas of beauty standards. And I know when I say beauty standards, it's in terms of like kind of across the board, like what is acceptable for people to look like and what is not. And I suppose it's definitely a hang up amongst, I'm sure there are, like you said, Fazana, there are probably other things that have impacted it, but I think one of the big things was the slave trade and thinking about whose bodies have value and whose have less value. And it does mean that, so my family are like West Indian, and in I can't speak for all Caribbean countries, but definitely in Trinidad there is, very, very mixed in terms of there's lots and lots of different kind of from different heritage, kind of all. It's a bit of a melting pot, is Trinidad, in terms of the different communities that exist there. But there is a lot around the hierarchy of who gets what kind of support, and actually there is a lot of very derogatory terms for various different people depending on the mix that you're perceived to have, just definitely around kind of the shade of your skin, but also around not just the shade of your skin but also your heritage, in terms of people getting called all kinds of names. I'm not going to be repeating any of those names, but they can be quite derogatory, but accepted at the same time.
Yeah, as you were saying that, Megan, I was thinking about like kind of so connections that I had with people who were based in like America and stuff like that, when they talk about slavery and the different shades of skin and kind of terminologies. Sometimes it makes me think, what does that mean? It sounds really offensive, and then in some contexts it's quite like naturally accepted, and it's and I don't know, why is it acceptable for some people and it's not acceptable for others, and what does that actually mean, and where does that originate from? And this kind of this idea around now having to, I don't want to say rebrand, um kind of there's almost like a rebranding of people of darker shades to be like more accepted now, like you see on social media and stuff like that around, you know um black is beautiful. When they're darker, the darker the skin, there's like now like really dark dolls. And being a mother, I'm one of those people who's like, I need my daughter to know that she's beautiful, whatever her shade is. I need my nieces to know that they're beautiful, whatever their shade is, and to accept the skin that they kind of created in, and accept whatever the hair texture and whatever, and all that kind of thing, in terms of their own acceptance and self-esteem and stuff like that. But at the same time, I'm overly conscious about that, because I know the experiences of also racism and how that can come about, and also the colorism that comes with that as well. And almost try to help for her not to experience that.
I guess I was kind of thinking colorism is actually something that comes up a lot, actually, and it comes up, unfortunately, in the way where I work with a lot of kind of adolescents who kind of really struggle with their self-esteem. They really struggle with their appearance, and sometimes when you kind of explore that, you would sort of hear that they've had a lot of experiences of family members or extended family or like the wider network kind of making these comments around their physical appearance. And I guess it moves beyond from just colorism, but I guess something I did identify, especially working with families of the global majority, there was this thing about, my gran used to say I was too dark and I shouldn't go out in the sun. Like I would hear all these kind of really horrible comments, and I guess for me, my experience of seeing that within the therapy room is those kind of reoccurring sort of, I don't want themes, or like those kind of comments a lot of these adolescents kind of have, and they kind of, it seems like they kind of internalize it, or it does have an effect on their self-esteem. I guess I had someone say to me, oh, this used to bother me growing up, my skin color was too dark and it used to bother me, but I've accepted it now. And I was like, accepting this isn't, it's not something that needs to, I don't know how to word it, but it almost just felt like I felt really sad. I was like, why is this something that needs to be accepted? This is you. There's nothing wrong with the color of your skin. Why did this have to become something that requires acceptance? And I think that's where I was getting really hurt and angry about. But I find these are the kind of experiences, interestingly enough, and I don't know if this, I know we haven't spoken about gender, but I do feel like, well, I can only speak for my own culture, but there is that difference in where those comments around colorism is made. I feel like it's mainly, or I feel like, well, from my experience, I can only talk from my own experience, but it's more heavily focused around women and girls growing up. I feel like there was much less, I feel like the boys or the males or the men, they didn't have as much pressure to have looked a certain way. But I don't know what you guys think about that.
I guess I just wanted to add something that I resonated with when Fazana was talking, and it was about that whole thing of not going out in the sun so you didn't get darker. That was something that I know definitely happened with me. And do you know what's really interesting? I think, I don't know if I can say I found a balance either, because at the same time, there's a problem. It's like I do want to keep my natural skin tone. Does that make sense? But then I still have that guilt of, you know, why I mean, it makes me think, why do you want to keep a natural skin tone? Is it because, I guess, culture, not culturally, but like culturally, in terms of being Nigerian, I'm probably still seen as lighter skin maybe than other people might be saying. And I sometimes think, if you were darker skin, would you have the same mindset? I don't know if that makes any sense. So even though I'm like, it does make me feel sad when people that are darker skin feel they need to change what they look like. At the same time, I also think about me, like, is there certain privilege, for example, that maybe I still feel like I might be getting that I want to hold on to? Maybe there isn't, but I guess for me, that's some of the thoughts that I've genuinely had when I think about if I've internalized that thing about when I was a child being told, oh, you know, don't play in the sun and all that kind of stuff. But something else I was actually thinking about is kind of how would you tackle this in therapy? Like, you know, one, how would you even bring it to therapy? Like, I feel like it's such a sensitive thing that I sometimes think, how would it even come up in therapy? And I remember when before I even started training, when I was working in CAMS, I worked with a young person, and she was so excited to have someone of African descent as her therapist. And I remember she was talking about not liking her hair because it was actually kind of similar to mine, but her sister had more curly hair because she was from, not Yemen. She was from, what country is it? Not Somalia. It was a country near Somalia, though, like, so where sometimes the hair texture, yes, I think so. So yeah, I'm saying, yeah, like people could hear what Mariam said. Mariam said, "You try," yeah, she couldn't hear her. Yeah, and when she saw me one day in our session, like, have my natural hair out, she was really shocked. She was like, she would never have had the confidence to do that, and that genuinely broke my heart. Because even though I know that my friends maybe sometimes say that, it's different when I'm an adult now, but hearing someone so young like feel like she's always compared herself to her sister, because I was the older sister as well, for so many years. And I mean, I don't even know if she still rocked her hair out in the end, but even just that little, her saying that gave her that invitation to actually bring that into, like, you know, our care coordination space and actually talk about that. And I don't know, I guess for me, I guess I was thinking about how these things can be talked about, how I would be addressed in therapy, because it's such a sensitive topic, so to speak. And also maybe thinking about have you ever had an experience in therapy where it has come up, and how did you deal with it, or how did you approach it, so to speak?
I think it's a subject that it's all right to connect with people we're working with about, because it might visibly connect anyway, and if it's not brought into the room, like some of the things we spoke about in the previous season, you know, in terms of kind of bringing things up in terms of racially, or kind of, you know, things to do with this sense, but also kind of, what about like blended families, or families that have like completely very, like, a lot of differences, and this is part of what the family are identifying as the problem, the differences in their kind of maybe differences in the different heritages, in, you know, and this is being part of the main thing that maybe some people are feeling like that's not being valued, that's not being accepted. And yet it is sad that this is a thing that we have to accept. Because when you it's something I was kind of backgrounding, and I was thinking about some of the things kind of Fazana and Lola you've mentioned, that I only became aware of me loving how dark my skin is and wanting it to even be darker when I came to this country. And to the point where I think I remember, like, as a, like, is it like post 16 or like 17 or however old I was, um saying to my mum, "Oh, I'm gonna go back to Uganda. I don't really care if anyone's gonna come with me. I'm just gonna go and I'm gonna lie in the sun. And I want to just get dark as chalk. I want to be dark like charcoal. I want to be very dark. And I'd really hate this place, and all, And I had one of those kind of teenage tantrum of really kind of feeling like I need to be able to connect with the darkness in terms of my shade and my culture and all of that. And I was going all in with that. And that was to do with my heritage and wanting to be extra connected to that, and whatever felt that belonged in that sense. So for me, I didn't realize the shade of my skin meaning anything that I needed to accept or reject or even consider, until I came in a society where, to some people, that was a thing. Like, where I'm from, yeah, there was people with different shades of skin, but it was a thing. And everyone prefers like fairer skins and things, to the point where, like, my dad's family, like my family, there's like people who are really dark and people who are light, to the point where people will make choices in who they choose to marry. Is like, oh yeah, you need to marry a lighter person so that the children come out like the right shade. And I'm thinking, freaking hell, like, I don't think I can say that here, but anyway, that the things like that is quite, it's so disheartening. Like, it breaks my heart, like, if you really think about that. And to the point where I'm thinking, let's just all go in the sun and lie down and just be really, really, really dark. And I'm thinking, but no, that is excluding some people. Do you know what I mean? You can't really say things like that. But yeah, I was thinking about, what about if there's multiple shades in the family, like Fazana was talking about, and the mix of that, and the things that, the power in those things as well.
I was also, I guess, I was thinking about, would it even be, I know there was a question, I can't remember who asked it, about how would you bring this conversation into the therapy space? And Mariam, as you were talking, I was thinking about, well, if it wasn't an experience that maybe the therapist has had, or didn't grow up in a culture where it was a big thing, I'm wondering if it would even be brought up. And I guess this is where sometimes I feel like how we use ourselves can be quite I don't know what the word is, but it's I guess sometimes not having experience of certain things can actually constrain us, because it might be something that was quite significant for that person that they couldn't bring it up, but because we missed it. I guess I was thinking about this idea of how would we bring it in, how would we bring conversations about colorism in the therapy space. And I guess I was wondering about what would we want to achieve when we do have those conversations, or when we do bring it up. Because no, cut that out. I don't know what, I've lost my train of thought. I don't know what it was, guys. I don't know. Can't remember.
I wonder whether it was something to do with like, you started to say something around kind of like self. I in my head I thought self with the therapist, and in terms of how we bring ourselves into the therapy room. But also I also kind of, I'm having thoughts around you saying around kind of curiosity, and not having a sense of that experience, also taking away from whether someone would be curious about that thing if they don't know about it. But that might be it from a different trail of thought.
Yeah, I guess I was this is actually interesting, because I brought this up with my supervisor, because how comfortable am I to talk about or bring these kind of conversations up? And sometimes I think about this, and I think particularly when I come across adolescents who've basically shared that there has been very explicit colorist comments made towards them and it has impacted them, sometimes I want to know and I want to open it up, but sometimes I feel like there is that thing, and I guess it's because of how I position myself, but feeling like they would look at me like I wouldn't understand. I don't know how to explain it, but I was just thinking about this. I grew up in a very colorist culture, but often I was on the end where I didn't get the brunt of it as much as, for example, maybe my sister would, who's significantly darker than me, or like extended family or whatever. So sometimes I always feel like, if me bringing this up, am I itself making it uncomfortable? And I don't know if it goes back into my early childhood experiences of being compared a lot. So I always feel like if I bring this conversation up, there's going to be some comparing. But I think it's more because of I don't know, I think it stems from maybe my childhood experiences. So I always make this assumption that if I bring this up and if I haven't severely experienced it, oh my God, this person's going to think I'm not able to empathize, or they're going to sit there or compare, or I don't know. I feel like that's kind of my hesitancy around bringing these conversations up, but that doesn't mean that I shouldn't, if that makes sense, and it doesn't mean that I wouldn't, but it's the emotions that come with it. Yeah.
And I was thinking, as you were saying that, if you're kind of going through all of those different aspects of the process, as all of those emotions and all of that stuff is going on for you, I wonder what's going on for the person who you're working with, who's naming it, and like whatever loaded stuff that might be coming with, and their experiences. So I wonder, it's really interesting. It's just feeling like systemic supervision almost, and like we're doing peer supervision right now. Sometimes these episodes feel like that to me, by the way, and it's like therapy. But it just made me think about that, but also like also that you spoke about positioning is that, and I'm thinking sometimes the constraints of being in that therapy room constrains you from what you can and can't talk about. I don't know where that comes from, and it's not necessarily just about professional boundaries or ethics or stuff like that. I think there's more to it, that sometimes I think there's something about, even me just saying therapy room, that within itself constraints, because it's almost like this is a position you need to have.
Do you know what's so funny? Because when you were talking, Fazan, I never knew it was on my mouth. I kept thinking maybe it's about the how. It's about the how you talk about it, and it doesn't always mean you. And when I say how, I mean even let's say the person doesn't bring up, but they make comments that that probably imply some sort of prejudice towards skin tone or colorism. It's about how do you name it? And I guess again, systemically, let's just start by being curious. Like you're saying, ma'am, they might not even know that they're doing it. Does that make sense? So it could be just starting from that curiosity stance in terms of, okay, I'm quite intrigued actually as to what that means for you naming X, Y, Z. Does that make sense? And so because I guess there will be things that will come up in therapy that we might not always feel like, even if you have an experience, like you said, Fazana, you can still empathize with, you can still be curious about, you can still, do you get me? Like you can still explore, regardless of what background you're from or what your lived experience is, because it's not everything that comes up that we might be able to relate to or might have experienced before, but at least we can remain curious to have that conversation. I guess is what I was thinking. But I do agree, Mama, it gives me a lot to think about, and it does feel like supervision. I think it's nice, but also like therapy, like we've talked about before, how important it is for therapists to have therapy. And maybe this is our form of therapy, and I'm not mad at it at all. But yeah, I guess, and there is a lot of things that we can't talk about. I guess I'm going back again, thinking about when someone brought up gender as well, in terms of how it's different for males and females in terms of how they experience colorism, and then even thinking about race, is it that do females maybe experience it more even within their race, and do men experience it more across races? Does that make sense? But then I was also thinking about a white person. I guess I was thinking about someone I went to school with that was that had ginger hair, but obviously that also meant that she had freckles and her skin tone was a lot lighter. And it's so interesting that for them, it almost felt like the darker the wear, the better. Whereas I felt like for us, some people will sometimes think the lighter you are, the better. And it's so interesting. I always think, who starts these things? Like, who actually in their mind thinks, let me just, do you get what I mean? Like, who actually starts this sort of narrative that then leads to so much insecurity in people in terms of their hair or their skin tone or certain aspects of, do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know, I guess I always think about like who starts this, because I want to think about how can we change that? I don't know if that makes any sense. How do we just accept how we are for who we are without feeling like we need to go one way or the other way? Don't know if that makes any sense, but I guess that's something I've been thinking about a lot lately, but especially having these conversations that we're having on the podcast as well.
But I guess I'd be quite curious. I don't know if this is a safe space enough to have this conversation, but I'd be really interested to hear. Mariam, you went into, you know, this protest where you were like, I'm gonna sit in the sun and I'm gonna get as dark as I can. And honestly, I really want to know how you, and I think maybe anyone who's listening in who's experienced colorism in some shape or form would be really interested to hear how you got to that point where, you know, you grew up where maybe you experienced colorism and you know, you were like, no, I'm not living by this. I'm not living like this. Actually, I'm gonna protest. And you did. And I'm wondering, how did you get to that point? Because I think it's such a big thing to want to break out of certain beliefs and certain ideas of ways of thinking, and it's such a big and difficult thing to do. And I guess I'm wondering, how do you get to that point, or what allowed, not just you, Mariam, I hope you don't think I'm like cornering you into a corner, but how do you get to that point where you think, no, I'm not letting this affect me, I'm not allowing this to affect me, and I don't believe this, and I'm not going to pass this on to the next generation? How do you get to that point, and what sort of allowed it to happen?
I think those are really important questions, Fazana. And even before you named it, I was thinking about kind of something Lola was saying around kind of like, where does this come from? And you talking about kind of my experience reminded me about, like, for me, there was something about this idea of, you know, coming to this country for better opportunities and stuff like that. Like, you know, my parents made a decision and stuff like that, which was great. So but at the same time, it came with all these other stuff. So you mentioned earlier on about kind of Eurocentric features being prioritized or being kind of seen as the most desired, or what everyone should have, and kind of the idea of that as well. And I think that's quite a big deal, and I think it's a bigger deal than about, or I had understood, that for me kind of, I think, had an impact on me. But also, where does that come from? And, you know, the societal pressures and social media.
Is it okay to, I just wanted to jump in just to track back actually a little bit about the how we bring it into the therapy space, because I think this speaks quite a lot of how we bring any areas of I want to say oppression, but that's probably not the right word, just where people are marginalized, where actually we aren't necessarily part of that marginalized group, or even if we are, I suppose it reminds me a lot of Dr. Aisha McKinsey-Mavinga's work, where she talks a lot about how we bring things into supervision spaces and into therapy spaces where it's okay to not share experiences, but I suppose in a true systemic therapy thinking, it's being curious and finding out, even if you feel like you have exactly the same experiences as somebody, there's something really important about just allowing them to have that space to talk about it from their perspective, what they experienced, how they experienced it, what their thoughts are about it. And, you know, even if we share exactly the same experiences, which is not very likely, but even if we do, it's giving them that space to feel validated, and feel heard, I suppose. And I suppose that when we were thinking, granted this is a few conversations back, but when we're thinking about how do we bring that into the therapy space, that's one of the things that I was really considering, and thinking about how it's the same in terms of racism, how we bring that into the therapy space. It's very much, we may not be sharing experiences with people, but we're listening and thinking with them about how their experience has impacted them, as well as thinking about the wider kind of societal context of their experiences.
I was wondering if people that are listening, I wonder what their thoughts are actually, if they've never experienced or even heard about colorism before. I wonder what they're thinking in terms of how they might be able to address it in their therapeutic space, so to speak, in terms of, if something like that comes up and they don't feel maybe well versed and or they've never experienced it before, how would they want to address it? Or I guess us talking, actually, what advice would we give them in terms of how you would like something like this to be addressed in a sensitive way? Don't know if that makes any sense. If anyone's got any ideas of, actually, for me, if it's addressed in this way, that feels, I don't know, respectful, or
I guess I know I shared a little bit about my kind of emotional, kind of internal dialogue about what happens when these kind of conversations happen in therapy, but I guess I'd be quite interested to know what sort of everyone else's experiences or ideas about bringing it into therapy or having those conversations. Because I know Lola said something about being respectful, but I was wondering what that means. Because I guess just the whole idea of colorism is the most disrespectful thing ever. So it's like, how do I bring up something that's so difficult and so painful, and so personal for a lot of people? And I think that's also where I'm like, ooh. And I know Megan said something about bringing up racism in therapy, and actually I've got exactly the same emotional roller coaster where I go through an absolute, like, I completely understand the need and requirement to explore racial discrimination and stereotypes that individuals may be living in and how that can affect them. But it's just the idea of, oh my God, if I talk about this, maybe it's going to bring up something for me. Maybe it's going to bring up something from my own experiences, and maybe that's too painful for me. But then it's like, well, whose psychological safety am I managing here? And then there's the element of, I've experienced this, it's different, it's not the same, but is it too similar? And what, I don't know, sometimes I feel like, I guess that's why I really, controversially, I really like systemic therapy's idea of self-disclosure. And I know that's one of the things that kind of sticks systemic out, because I know that there is a big, we don't do that in other mental health professions. Like it was a no where you don't talk about yourself or your experiences. But sometimes I can see why self-disclosure might be really helpful in these settings, and actually say, this is a really difficult conversation and I can see that it's for you, but actually, and just naming that it's difficult for yourself as a therapist. And I guess that's one way I've been doing it, actually, just being really honest about the kind of emotions it brings up for me. And sometimes that can be quite comforting to know, actually, unfortunately, these experiences are happening, and you've not just kind of sat there and had it growing up, and it's not just with you. I don't know, it kind of, I don't know what the word is. I don't want to say normalizes, but there is comfort in knowing that it's shared. I don't know if that makes sense. But anyway, I've waffled.
No, it makes perfect sense. And if it doesn't make sense, that's also okay if it doesn't make sense, because it will make sense at some point to the person who it needs to make sense to at the time when it needs to make sense. So for me, it's like all like yes. I was really resonating with everything you were saying, Fazana, in that even in the sharing of the differences of experiences, and I think you mentioned this earlier on as well, Megan, even in the sharing of the differences of experience, or even saying that, you know what, I've had an experience similar to yours, but I wonder what that's telling me now and what I can bring to this space now as we're talking about it in terms of your experiences. I'm not sure, I'm curious about this, and things like that. And also like and the power of listening to someone else's experience of that thing. But also, yes, like I've been in a therapy room situation where the person talking about the horribleness that they've been through in terms of racism and colorism and who it was from, and like, you know, whether that's coming from inside the family, outside the family, from every crux of the side. And I'm thinking, and I wanted to say subhanallah, like I was thinking, like, where is the escape? Like where is the, do you know what I mean? Like you're getting it from all these angles, and that for me resonated with that feeling of getting it from all angles is an experience that I took from that. And you know, I felt comfortable to share that, but also thinking out loud with the person that I was working with is, how could this, me thinking out loud in terms of my internal dialogue, but also my own experiences with the little that I'm sharing, is that how could that help us in this conversation that we're having now in terms of where do we go from here? Where can anyone go from here in terms of that? And you know, what does any of it mean, or why do we have to go somewhere from it as well? Do you know what I mean? There's all these other things as well. So it's really powerful.
It is. Do you know what? It really made me think of a slight inverse to that, and I think I was thinking a little bit about the. So when Fazana, you were talking about the kind of colonial roots of some of the kind of norms that we were talking about in terms of what is kind of that feels like they impact or have informed colorism and shadeism. I was thinking about the kind of the internal and the internalized kind of what they call the internalized kind of white judge or black judge or whatever kind of frame of reference, but obviously thinking about it in kind of a white supremacy kind of framework, it's thinking about how we kind of internalize that. And I was thinking, got to keep going with me with this, I was thinking a lot about how actually in spaces where we're working clinically, where people then make comments that are colorist, like that are deep-seated kind of colorism kind of tropes that come out, and how we then manage that as therapists as well, because that's kind of the other side of that, I guess, is when clients then bring these kind of ideas into the space, and it's challenging in terms of us having to challenge, but also thinking about how that's done and how we maybe not challenge, but how we I don't know what people do in those situations, because actually I haven't had too many of those experiences, but it feels like that's something that could easily come up.
I was thinking as you were saying that, Megan, I was saying I've had some experiences, but I don't think I could even share or begin to process to how to even share some of those. But it's very interesting. Like I could talk about this for like till the cows come home. Seriously, like I could talk about this forever, but that's not necessarily a helpful thing. But
I have a question. What would you want people listening to take from this? Does that make sense? And that now that you've shared some stuff, what would be the one thing that you're like, actually, if anyone is listening, if there's one thing I want them to take from this conversation that we've had today, what would it be? And that's to everyone as well, actually. We can start with Mariam.
I was rolling my eyes, Lola. Like, talk about throwing me under the bus. I'm joking. But I was thinking about, I think there's something about kind of the awareness that colorism is experienced in by different people in different contexts. Like light-skinned people experience colorism, dark-skinned people experience colorism. It's beyond the surface. It's kind of it has multitude of levels, and I think it's really important for people to be curious about their own position, but also in relation to whoever like they're working with, and to consider that as a thing. And when they do get faced with that, be curious about what's going on for them, and also how to bring voice to that thing, because the other person is likely to be going through something as well, like something else is going on there, that sometimes we need to think about how safe is it to bring it into the room, when can it be brought into the room, and also what does it mean.
I guess in terms of your question, Lola, about what is it that I guess I want the audience to take away from this, I guess I would love to hear about other therapists or emerging therapists' experiences of talking about colorism. I'd feel like I feel like I think this is something I've made clear from the beginning, but I am a trainee and I'm still learning, and I really I would love to hear more about maybe the experiences of how, I guess there's no kind of one way of doing it, one way of bringing it in, but I'd be interested to know what the options are. Do I always have to go through an emotional roller coaster? But I guess for me, it got me really thinking about my own practice, and I guess the feelings I have towards this topic, and it made me realize how I've lost my train of thought, guys. Yeah, I guess for me, what I get from this space anyway is to reflect on my own work and my own way of working, and that's exactly what's gonna happen today. Not gonna happen today, as in I'm going to get from this episode. But also I guess as these episodes go on, I just feel like I have no understanding of anything. Like I'm like, oh my god, no, this topic is huge, and then we talk and I'm like, oh my god, you know what, I have no idea, or I have very limited knowledge, and I feel like that's where I'm kind of at the moment. Yeah, this one's a deep one, guys.
I think for me, it feels like I would like to hear more about, actually, I think more about people's experiences in terms of how they've approached colorism and thinking about colorism within a therapeutic setting, but also just in life in general, because I'm nosy. But it's, yeah, I think for me, it feels like there is so much more to do and so much more to learn from the people that I work with, in terms of the people that come to therapy, that want to have therapy. And I suppose that's where it gets quite interesting. And especially for me, thinking about, I think I connect back a lot to my family, and thinking about, yeah, the kind of the way colorism and racism play a role in you know, my family setup as well. So yeah, just lots of food for thought, I suppose.
Thank you, guys. That's really helpful. I guess one thing that came up, actually, I was still thinking about it when Fazana, I was like, how can you talk about it respectfully? And actually, Mariam gave me the word I meant, even though that was the word I used. She said how you safely kind of bring up in the therapeutics. But I think that's what I meant more. Like, how do you think about safety? And something Fazana said as well, not just for the other person, but for yourself as well, in terms of psychological safety, for you as a therapist, but also the people that you're working with. But I definitely have to echo what Megan said. I would love to hear people's experience about this topic, or any thoughts that they've had, or even if there's anything they want to add to the conversation for us. Like, actually, I don't know, I was hoping you guys would mention XYZ when you were talking about this. And yeah, I think it'd be really good to hear that. I don't know, it feels really mellow now. I don't know, it's quite heavy. And I'm like, how do we end on a brighter note? But actually, maybe it's okay to end on this note. Yes, I guess Mum was like, why do we need to? Yep, you're completely right. But But yeah, as always, guys, thank you for listening and coming on this journey with us. And yeah, and hopefully we can continue some of these conversations even in other episodes, so we can maybe listen back and even reflect on it, or yeah, and then people do sort of email in as well if they share things with us, then it'll be really good to also maybe reflect on that too. So yeah, thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.